my name is Fran Murphy. I'm head of what we call the field services side, the contractual arm of Dyfed Archaeological Trust. But we also have, sorry, is that stopped? Can you still hear me? Tell me, raise your hand if you can't. So we, as well as doing our contractual work, we also have the joy of sometimes doing grant-aided work in beautiful locations such as this, which is at Porth y Rhaw Promontory Fort in Pembrokeshire. And we've been doing some work here now since, actually we did some work in the 80s, but that was before my time. No, sorry, 1990s. But recently I've been working here with a team of volunteers and other staff from 2019. A break for COVID, then we returned in 2022, and last year we did our final year's work here. So just to show you where we are, we're right down here in the far southwest on the coast between Solva and St David's. And this is a distribution map of the hill forts and other Iron Age enclosed settlements in Wales. And you can see some of the distribution is quite lowland, but you can see this lovely number of forts all along the coastline in Pembrokeshire. And one of the Porth y Rhaw Promontory Fort this is Porth y Rhaw Promontory Fort from the air. It's a Royal Commission's shot of Toby Drivers. And it shows the massive multi-valet defences that once defended this promontory of land out into the sea. As you can see, much of it has been eroded over time, and what we've lost is really the centre of the hill fort. All this internal area has now been eroded away, and equally it's been eroded away on this side as well. And we've been tracking its erosion, and we've lost about a metre on that side since our excavations in the 1990s, and a little more on this side here. And as you can see, there's this sort of pincer movement going on, and soon all that we have of this internal area will be eroded through, and this will become a stack. So our estimate is that the internal area was roughly about 3/4 of a hectare, and we've got about 1/10 of a hectare left, if you like, 1,000 square metres left of internal area. And our aim with CADU funding was to basically record as much as possible before it's lost to the sea, or it becomes too dangerous for us to do any work here. But it's an amazingly impressive site, and I'm always surprised when people walking along the coastal path, they don't see the banks and ditches, and sometimes they come across, and when visitors on the excavation, and they say, "Why are you here?" And I'd say, well, explain them what the hill fort is, and they'd say, "Oh, I've walked past here for 20 years and I didn't know that those banks meant anything." So as I was saying, my colleague Pete Crane, who used to for many years work for the Trust, excavated in the 1990s. And this is at the far tip of what survives, that eastern promontory survives of the internal area. And he showed over the periods of excavation periods that he worked there, how much survived, evidence survived of the internal settlement. And as you can see here, we have the circular slots from wooden roundhouses, and equally we have much here and much more chunkier stone walled roundhouse here. And I think that may be Hubert Wilson, one of our colleagues, who, against all health and safety rules, to record this section was held by his ankles over the side. So he could drop a tape measure down, and someone from the other side of the fort could shout, "Yeah, that's about right." And then he'd then pull it up and go, "Oh, 1 metre 20. sort of thing, don't do this at home. So that, as far as dating goes, from this excavation, it showed that the site was occupied for about 1,000 years. So roughly speaking, we're thinking about from the mid-Iron Age right through to the 4th century Romano-British period. Just to show you that's the roundhouse. So again, when Pete was excavations that he carried out in the 1990s, again were funded by CADU, and that was looking at the rates of erosion that was happening. As Judith has already mentioned, we're very concerned that this site will it might not just erode gradually, but it might actually be some catastrophic event, as often happens on these cliffs face, make it impossible for us to do any more work. So CADU asked us to, in negotiation with them, we returned in 2019. And what we wanted to do in 2019 was look at this area in here, particularly, which is what survives of the entrance, because most of the entrance actually has eroded away. And just to, I hope you can see this plan, but this is a plan of our 2019 results. This is the entranceway in, and you see these 2 large post holes here and the remains of the revetment walls for the entranceway. And the little trench here we put in, looking into the internal bank. So these are the banks, the inner defensive bank. This is your entranceway up into the fort. And this is a little trench we put in here, looking at a depression in the inner bank, which we thought was possibly a gatehouse. That's what the entranceway looks like, as if you're leaving the fort. This is its last phase. This is what it looked like, or what survives of what it looked like before it went out of use. So if you can imagine, you would have walked through, and these walls would have stood at some height above you. And this is what survives. This is after that most of the stone has been robbed. So these large, huge boulders that acted as the base of the revetment walls have been left in. And this is a wall that's been inserted at a later date to narrow the entrance. But it's amazing when we did this, and I know there's people here who worked on the excavations, because when we actually got all the stone out, we were down now onto the surface that in the 4th century you would have walked through. And that's an amazing thing to think about, that actually you were standing in the same place that people came and went day by day as they entered the fort. Those are the post holes for the gate. And that's what it looks like when you have to draw all these things. I love this photograph. They look so industrious. And in that little slot we put into the internal bank, we were a bit unsure of what we had found. We suggested it was a possible roundhouse, but there was no obvious floor. There was a little bit of evidence for metalworking, and our only find was a bit of quern stone. But that's where we had to leave it in 2019. It was only a 3-week excavation. We had to backfill the site, which is always a joy. And following on from our break for COVID, we came in 2021 and opened up the area further into the fort, expanding what we'd done in 2019 with this area here, looking particularly at the remains of that roundhouse. And what we found was that that inner bank had denuded, it had spread over time, and that the roundhouse had been built into the bank. And it had a lovely path and threshold stone leading into the little roundhouse. And that's the threshold stone, which is actually a bit of reused stone from elsewhere. We're unsure where or what its purpose was. We've got a lot of work to do in the post-excavation stage. And the path was made up from broken quern stones. And they're all quite, were probably, I'm going to say 2nd to 4th century AD. On the other side, we had a real mess of features. It was so difficult to sort ourselves, to understand what we were looking at. But all I can say is that there were hints that we had quite interesting features. We just caught the edge of a little stone-lined pit in the trench section, and you must appreciate I'm scooting through the results of the trench, the 2021 to get to 2022. But just to say, all it highlighted was an awful lot of good stratigraphy, which is unusual on an Iron Age site, and there's a lot. This site has been well used. So 2022, we had an extension on our time from Cadw, so we were now given 5 weeks, which ultimately ended up being 7 weeks excavation, and the aim was to excavate completely the roundhouse that Pete, that stone-walled roundhouse that Pete picked up in the 1990s. And this is what it looks like when you start. Underneath the turf is this very sterile clay, which has to all be hacked off. But then the roundhouse starts appearing. And when we emptied the backfill of Pete's trench, which runs along this edge, that's what he revealed in the 1990s. And you can see all this stone on the floor, this quite level stone. It shows you just the difference between opening a trench and opening a wider area, because his interpretation, understandably, was that it was a stone-lined floor. And I was really looking forward to this beautiful stone floor. It's actually a drain, and there is no, this is the floor, beaten earth floor. So that's what it looks like when it's fully revealed. And it's such a, I mean, it's a joy on a beautiful sunny day like this to work in this sort of location. I have to say, when the southwesterly is blowing and the rain is hitting you in the face and the wheelbarrows are being nearly blown off the side of the cliff, it's not quite so. But most of our time here, I know there's someone, oh yeah, who remembers that well, not being able to stand up. But so what we have here is a roundhouse that has been, it's about 12 metres in diameter. The walls roughly are about 1 metre thick. It has been dug into the slope somewhat in here on this side, and then that material has been placed here under to build it up to create a very flat level platform. There are 2 entrances. The largest, the most prominent, is here with this huge threshold stone. And this, as you would have come up the entrance, you would have seen it right in front of you. It has a little back door over there, which is quite sweet. And it, I was going to say something and I've completely forgotten. But what I really like is that they had huge problems with water coming into the site, and over here is where they tried to manage that problem. But I'll say more about that. That's the main entrance to the roundhouse. And interestingly, again, they've used broken quernstones to patch up areas. So you can see the door jamb still in place and the 2 post holes for the door. It would have been a splayed entrance, so it's narrower internally to externally. And just for, this is a little picture that Toby Driver, the Royal Commission, made of a very similar site at Dinas Dinthla, and that's his interpretation. So you can imagine this is the sort of structure you might have seen, many of them, if you can imagine that internal area covered in possible roundhouses as you came up through the entranceway. What we did have, as you can see, running around the internal circumference of the roundhouse was a drain, a beautifully constructed stone-capped drain that took water. It was just excavated, it had been created to just allow enough drop to take it all the way round and out. I have to get my north, south, east and west, roughly speaking to the west. Am I right? Yes, I think, yes. So it takes it round the outside and then out through this little gate in the walls. But that wasn't good, actually, even so, that wasn't good enough. And they had real problems, so they had to actually excavate another drain to take it out. So this is a plan of the site by my colleague Hubert, and it shows the whole of the roundhouse as we exposed it. This is the drain that runs around, takes it out that way, and equally takes it out that way. That's a secondary drain that's inserted. But what was interesting was these, if you see, look at these bright red patches and the lighter pink. These are all, the lighter pink is incredibly thick, heat-affected clay. It's deposits of ash and clay, and the bright red is intensively heated, not burnt, but intensively heated areas of clay. And these are all hearths, little smithing hearths. And it's not smelting, this is smithing. This is the second phase of making your iron. I say in this case, probably most of the metalworking is in iron. There is some copper alloy, but most iron. And these are little tiny hearths which you would have had to have knelt down to operate. So probably yourself and one other person. And I'll show you a bit more later about how they worked. But it's amazing. It's unique to find this many hearths in one roundhouse. This was my favourite. This still has the little impressions in this intensively heated clay, if you like, this hearth cake, of where the crucibles sat. And the crucibles were quite tiny. We found fragments of them. They're really quite small. And often next to the hearths, as it says, most of them are placed in the drier areas of the roundhouse, are often large stones which we believe are being used as anvils. And this is what, to just give you an impression of what it would have been like. It would have been perhaps this one or this one. This is what a clay constructed bowl, which you would have had a hole in the side with a pair of bellows. You heat your charcoal up to as intense a heat as you can, and you work the little piece of bloom from, so you have one person on their knees, they take the object out, they beat it, it quench it, goes back in, and someone constantly working the bellows to heat that area up, to heat the coal up. So you're talking only about small objects, you're not talking large objects here, the creation of, but you can imagine with about 13 hearths, and some of these hearths have been replaced over time, they're being moved, they're being changed. But what you're getting the impression of, this isn't a house, this isn't a home, this is a workshop. This is where people, you can imagine the heat and the noise and it would have been, and if you can imagine a thatched roof, little light coming in, the only light you've got is from your fire, and you're working these small, producing these small objects. And I should have said that Pete's date for I think it's a second, oh God, now I can't remember. 4th century date comes from this roundhouse. What we also, in this clay that we find across site, is masses of slag, as you would expect, as a result of all this metalworking. And if you remember that picture, this picture here, this is what all that survives. It's the bottom part of that clay bowl, if you like, which are often called hearth cakes. And within that, we can still see metal objects coming out of it. I can't think of the word. So all this slag is collected. We have it all, and a lot of it is going to be X-rayed. So a lot of the corroded iron, and the slag will all be analysed, and we'll have a much better understanding of what it is they're producing here. This is, I know you can't, well, might not believe me, but this is one of the better corroded objects. But you can see it's got a little point, and then it comes out. And actually that's a bit of corrosion, and it comes out here. A bit like, you know, if you were the top of an iron railing, like little fleur-de-lis, that's what we had. We had quite a few of those. But hopefully X-rays will tell us far more. But Tim Young from Cardiff University, who is an expert on slags, he came out to see the site, and he was astounded. He said he's never seen a roundhouse with so many smithing hards. And I made the mistake of saying smelting, and he went, oh, no, no, no. Smithing, Fran, smithing. This is not smelting. They're smelting elsewhere, but what is interesting is that there is no local source for iron ore, so they're importing this to work on. Again, this is the remains of your hearth, and here are the anvils that you're working on, and you can see the peck marks in that one. So we do have other finds, not just slag, not just huge amounts of slag, but occasionally, you know, something to indicate what other life is going on in the settlement. A little glass bead, a spindle whorl, a stamped rim of an amphora. But it just shows you just the activity that's going on in this site. You know, we often sort of imagine, I don't know, the sort of agricultural, farming that's going on in the time with the gentle, someone leading 2 oxen. You often see a picture of someone leading 2 oxen across a field with a roundhouse in the back. But this is really industrial stuff going on here. And we had hints of this in the earlier excavations. We had hints of metalworking. And Pete found it as well. But what we also was amazingly interesting on a site, an Iron Age site, is that this, is our roundhouse. But all around here, we had evidence of much earlier activity. So this is our roundhouse. But this is everything that preceded it. Often this roundhouse cuts lots of this activity, including a much earlier roundhouse, whose doorway is here. This is the edge of the cliff, and this is the edge, so you can see how close we are. And what is interesting and love about this one is it goes underneath the inner bank. So this is your inner bank coming round, and we excavated part into it. And this roundhouse actually is covered by the inner bank. And we could not make head nor tail of the section. And what we imagined we should be looking at, we kept cutting it back, and it didn't get any better. So what this is showing us is that our idea about how the defences were constructed and their date is probably wrong. And we need to rethink this considerably. And hopefully, when we go into the post-excavation stage next financial year, and we can start in the next 2 years, radiocarbon dating will help us establish a better phasing for the site. what I do like is the earliest feature on site is that one, bizarrely. It's a little gully, very straight, with a butt end on this south edge. And in it was right at the end was a large stone, and under that stone was a cache of slingshots. Why? I don't know, but and that's my colleague Hubert drawing all these features. And these are little gullies from earlier roundhouses that have been truncated by this later roundhouse. We had a mass of features, the palisade trenches for the wooden roundhouses, and then bizarre arrangements of enormous stone-packed post holes with beam slots, which we are yet to interpret. Apart from when we planned it, it looked like a cactus. Just this lovely little stone-packed, a stone-lined pit. I have to say it's because it had the blackest fill, and it's so nice to get a lovely rich black fill. Anyway, cutting back to our time, after 7 weeks, we had to backfill and remodel, which in the driest weather ever, and our turfs were now these tiny little biscuits, we had to try and make good. I haven't been up there, but I hope Thomas might have been. But I hope our netting is still all in place. We ended up having to net it all down with hemp net to try and stop the turfs being blown off the cliff, and hopefully it will all return as good. But just you know, I have to say, thanks to all the people who funded it, to CADU, to the Royal Commission, or the PCMP, the Nineveh Trust. There's somebody else who I've forgotten. But thank you for all our 3 years of working there, and to all the masses of volunteers who worked there up in all weathers. We couldn't do it without you. And just to show you that I do plan sometimes, which Hubert says I'm getting out of the habit of. Yeah, just to show you what it's like there when it's terrible, and to show you, look, there's Thomas actively working in the mud. Thank you. Yes, so what we're now doing, we're coming to the end of our excavations, and it's the post-excavation stage. So CADU always fund our post-excavation to write up and undertake all our analysis. And over the next 2 years, we will be doing that. And hopefully we'll have a much more comprehensive story to tell about what was happening at Porth y Rhaw Promontory Fort. I should mention, just quickly, that equally, as well as this excavation going on, we have done other work outside the fort, including field walking and geophysical survey, trying to form a more comprehensive picture of how the settlement would have worked within the landscape. Because it's always easy to look inside, but you've got to look outside as well. And that all that information put together will tell us so much more for the future. Thank you very much.